We are back post New Year's. It's 2024. We took some time throughout the holiday for a little rest and recuperation. We hope you all did too, but we are so excited to be back with some new stuff. And we wanted to kick off this year's conversation with exploring some of the most common healing barriers that we see in practice when it comes to gut and hormone health. It is our goal to help guide everyone in knowing that you can heal your gut and hormones without practicing restrictions or extremes. So, with that theme in mind, we are here to help guide you on educating around what are the 3 healing barriers that we see and what to do instead. So Jillie's going to kick us off with number 1.
All right. So first up is only focusing on food. Now, this might come as a surprise given that Abby and I love food. We talk about food all day long. And as functional medicine dietitians, we are clearly super passionate about food and strongly believe in the healing power of food and nutrition. Nutrition and building a supportive foundation with your dietary pattern is always one of the first places we start with clients because it has such a profound ripple effect really on every system and organ in the body. But a huge barrier that we see for clients is when the focus is only on food and nutrition. And really important lifestyle factors like stress, sleep, circadian rhythms, movement, phone use, and boundaries with phone use. When these things are neglected, that's where we see the big barrier pop up. I want to preface this by mentioning that it's unrealistic to expect yourself to focus on all of these things at once. So when we say only focusing on food is a barrier, that doesn't mean you need to focus on food, sleep, stress, movement, all these things at the same time if you're, exploring new habits and new strategies. And it's really important to prioritize what you're working on and really, avoid trying to change too many things at once to avoid, creating overwhelm. And that type of approach just isn't sustainable. But it's super common for us to see situations with clients where they are really frustrated when they reach out to work with us because they've been working really diligently to make dietary changes and they're not seeing results. They're not seeing improvements with their digestive health symptoms. They're not seeing improvements with their hormonal imbalance symptoms. To give you a specific example here, maybe a client comes to us for support with chronic bloating, miserable periods, and weight loss resistance. They've done a ton of work to balance their blood sugar. They're eating a whole foods diet. They're eating enough. They're meeting their carb, protein, fat, fiber needs really well, and their symptoms haven't budged. And they're like, what the heck is going on? After doing a little digging, we might learn that this client's sleep schedule is super erratic. They go to bed late. Maybe they go to bed at midnight, 1 a.m. They're up late using social media and on, their phone and, using screens late into the evening. Their wake up time is super erratic. When they wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is check social media, they check their email, they check their work Slack, and they get no exposure to sunlight. They have no calming practices in their morning routine to ground themselves to start the day. If you remember back to our circadian rhythm episode in season 1, we talk a lot about the importance of sleep and circadian rhythms for gut health, for digestion, for hormone health, for metabolic health. Digestion is circadian. And if circadian rhythms are dysregulated or disrupted, digestion likely will be disrupted too. And this could be a big driver of bloating, regardless of what we are eating. We also shared a study in the circadian rhythm episode that basically took a group of people that, had healthy metabolic parameters and disrupted their circadian rhythms for 3 weeks by keeping them up late at night and exposing them to blue light. At the end of 3 weeks, they experienced an 8% decrease in their metabolism, their metabolic rate, and they had pre-diabetic blood sugar parameters in just 3 weeks. There was no dietary changes or interventions happening in this study, and the dietary factors were confounded for or accounted for rather. So just to kind of point out that something like dysregulated circadian rhythms, an altered sleep schedule, poor sleep quality, all of these things could be driving symptoms, outside of food. We might also learn that this person also has, a really, really busy high pressure job. They work long hours and therefore they eat meals while they're distracted doing work, scrolling on their phone. And they also have to eat super fast because they don't have a lot of time to sit down and enjoy a meal. In season 2, episode 16 of the podcast, we discussed some of the core reasons that you might be bloated that have nothing to do with food. One of the core things that we discussed in this episode that we talked probably for far too long about because we love this topic was eating hygiene, or how you eat, and the importance of optimizing how you eat for supporting digestion. We could eat all the nutritious, nourishing food in the world, but if we are not supporting digestion with something like eating hygiene, and really supporting that, top to bottom process, with digestion, this could be a huge culprit with, bloating and discomfort and GI symptoms. Maybe we talk to this person and they also have no outlets for stress reduction in their daily life outside of the Orange Theory classes that they go to. Movement, of course, has a laundry list of health benefits and can feel really, really great mentally. So it can feel like a stress reliever in that sense. But ultimately, workouts, especially higher intensity workouts like Orange Theory, can be stressors, in themselves. So if we're operating in a state of chronic fight or flight, cortisol is dysregulated, this is absolutely going to contribute to impaired digestion and bloating, weight loss resistance, and likely miserable, unpleasant, painful periods. So just to kind of highlight a more specific example, and one that we might actually see in real life in terms of getting too focused on food and neglecting some of the really important, lifestyle factors that, impact our holistic health. So the overall message we really want to drive home here is that food and nutrition are incredibly important, but this is just one piece of the health puzzle, and we really have to assess all of our habits and, work to support the body holistically to see significant results with our health and symptoms over time.
And I think it's so common when we're just focusing on food to then get pulled into this like restriction based mindset of like, oh, maybe I need to stop eating XYZ food. Or, we see a lot of like, oh, maybe I have to go plant-based. It's the animal protein, or it's the, seed oils, or it's the whatever, all of these pieces that are more, really getting into like micro strategies that are most often not the big rocks that we see like really being the dynamics that are keeping someone entrenched in their gut or hormone habits. You really hit the nail on the head with like so many of those examples. I feel like in my own life too. So I just got the Oura Ring, and I'm like such like a obsessed user right now, even though Jilly said she's had it for 3 years and is still obsessed user, so I feel good.
100% obsessed still.
But what I've noticed is I love walking. I'm a pretty fast walker, and it's like, I maybe wear like a badge of honor on my shoulder about it, but I've realized like my walks are not stress reducing. Like my Oura is like, what are you doing? Like you're stressed to the, like I'm the highest on the chart after a walk and through it. And so even that reflection that I use, very much feel like, oh, they feel really like my mind feels expanded. Like I feel like they're a more energetic expander for me, but my body does not view them as being a stress experience or a stress reducing experience. So I'm working on maybe slowing down and breathing more throughout my walk, but also recognizing that those go into a different bucket, that my stress practices are my meditation. They're time on the acupressure mat. They're the times that I do the softer stillness pieces, not my movement practices. And the walking is, a different bucket. So even that of, once we kind of get some of this intel into like our, own unique body of like, oh, maybe we're doing some practices that, that we can look at through a different lens, especially when we start to think of all the ripples that impact our gut and hormones from the lifestyle perspective as well as the nutrition perspective.
I love all of those points that you bring up, especially, kind of the first thing that you mentioned around if we're not seeing results with the nutrition strategies, we often think that we need to go harder, right? We need to be more restrictive and we need to keep digging. And, sometimes, oftentimes with clients we work with, there are deeper layers and kind of micro strategies and deeper things we work on from a nutrition perspective. But we would never dive into those things if all of these lifestyle factors and foundations weren't in, a good place. So that's, such a good point and a helpful reminder. And I also think, what you're bringing up about your speedy, stressful walks, which I am most definitely guilty of as well. A lot of other people can probably relate to. And I think it also speaks to the fact that, sometimes our body does perceive things differently. Same thing. We were talking about this over the weekend, Abby, in terms of cold exposure and cold plunges, where, cold therapy, being a, hermetic stressor can have a lot of benefits, but as always, the context is incredibly important. We have to consider female physiology, all sorts of things. And cold exposure really kind of, increases the production of all these like feel good, brain chemicals. So we can be like, wow, I feel amazing and energized and this and that. But it is a stressor. And sometimes our system might experience something different. So we need to kind of think about, all of these different factors, the context, and just make sure that our stress outlets aren't actually stressors.
It's such a good thing and to think about. And I think even more so as these more like gadgets and gizmos, and I'm big fan of the sauna kind of cold plunge, but recognizing that it has a place, and almost like I'm almost thinking like two different buckets now. Like one is the nervous system support that's more in stillness, and that's more like gentle, really deep grounding breath work and meditation and journaling and kind of the things that we do in a stillness practice. And then we can have the tools of sauna, the cold plunge, the, walks, the things that do have a degree of stress to them, different degrees for different things. Certainly walks are probably not the level of cold plunge unless you're like having the zoomies like I am around my neighborhood. But that there is a degree of stress that gets stirred up by those. And then sometimes as a result of that, our body comes into a lower level of stress on kind of the come down experience. That's typically what we see after like a sauna or sometimes after a cold plunge. But we have to have the resilience to withstand that initial stressor in order to get the benefit of the come down. And if our bodies, if we've got maybe our bucket of stress is too high because of other dynamics, this is where we want to start with those stillness practices and the very, like, if we think about like pulling all the fancy stuff away and just doing like the bare minimums of looking at like, am I eating whole foods? How is my sleep practice? Am I getting sunlight in the morning? Like the very unsexy foundations that we talk endlessly about, like those are the level of which we want to be starting at, and really making sure that those are like present and accounted for. Then we can kind of transition to say like, ooh, some of these fancy bells and whistles, are they appropriate for me? Do they feel good for me? All of those pieces. And we'll get a clearer picture as to, do they feel good for you, or are they just kind of junking stuff up a little bit more?
Yeah. And I will also be the first to admit that on my own healing journey, stillness practices were the hardest. And, for me, they actually, and I find this for a lot of clients, they ended up being the most impactful, or one of the most impactful pieces of my own healing journey. And it's kind of, I always like butcher any type of saying, but like the things that you resist the most are the things that you probably actually need the most, or however the saying goes. But we live in a world that is very stressful, and a lot of us are, our bodies get used to and adapt to operating in that chronic fight or flight and operating in that, sympathetic state. And it can be very uncomfortable, to lean into stillness. But I think a lot of us can relate to that. And if that's something you observe, start small, and work from there. But, overall, I think we really, again, just want to highlight that food and nutrition, So important, such a foundational piece of health and, such a foundational piece of any healing journey. But we have to think about all these factors that impact the holistic body.
And kind of leading perfectly into our second healing barrier is undereating. Talk about a foundation. We talk about this concept a lot kind of throughout the podcast. We opened on our first episode really touching on this. So definitely tune back into that first episode to get a little bit more. And it comes up so often in our work with clients. So we just wanted to spend, some time really bringing this to the forefront for maybe the 100th time that we've talked about it so far. And this is one of the most common dynamics that we see in our clients in both of our private practices. I think part of maybe one of the major part of our jobs with clients is to coach, and a lot of this comes up with women, but really coaching to increase caloric intake kind of gradually as we start working with clients, because it is so common. And why we are so passionate about this optimal caloric intake, so avoiding this undereating, is that undereating is a huge driver of so many gut and hormone challenges. It in its own right is a root cause. So, all this conversation about this being a root cause, mold toxicity, parasites, like all of these big pieces, this is the biggest root cause that we all individually have the most control over. So again, this is where we want, people to really start and bring context to. Some of these, associated symptoms that we see with this undereating are chronic constipation, cortisol imbalances, blood sugar dysregulation, low thyroid function or hypothyroid, period problems, including the loss of your period, hair thinning, dry skin, mood imbalances. The list goes on. And all of these are associated with this undereating. And many individuals, many women are maybe unintentionally undereating. There might be some intentional restriction or on this kind of desire to maybe lose weight or shift body composition, but there also just might be a familiarity with this is how much I typically eat and always have. And it hovers around 1,500 to 1,800 calories. And that could be just too low. And one of the reasons why for many years you might be struggling with these kind of low experiences of symptoms that are kind of almost the snowball effect, building and building and building to bigger, more intense symptoms over time. And this is really because undereating is a massive stressor on the body. So reversing undereating, this is where, it can be challenging because when we approach it just from listen to your body and only eat when you're hungry, this is where Jillian and I kind of push back on the intuitive eating crowd a little bit. When you've been low grade under eating for quite some time, or even a history of yo-yo dieting or exploring intensive fasting or any type of lower caloric intake or diet for a longer period of time, it's normal to experience low grade hunger signals, especially low grade hunger in the morning. So you wake up and you're not hungry. So that you're like, oh, intermittent fasting feels really good for me. I start with just black coffee. And then we start to run on stress hormones. We want to be waking up with an appetite. This is really a positive sign for metabolism. And metabolism, we mean more of your body is taking in and utilizing energy effectively and efficiently. So we have to be eating optimal amounts of calories in order to have a robust metabolism, in order to utilize and create energy in our body for that optimal gut function, for those optimal hormones, for optimal mood, brain, hair, skin, you name it. And things that impact appetite throughout the day are stress, pushing off breakfast, coffee before breakfast, intermittent fasting, going long periods between meals. All of these practices ramp up our stress hormone that drives so much of that gut and hormone challenges we see, because in the absence of food, we're going to increase our stress hormone to mobilize blood sugar from the liver so that we can actually have the fuel to run the body. So if we don't give it to our body's going to find it, but not in the most graceful way, and definitely not the way that we want if we are seeking a healed gut and balanced hormones. So with that, if you are wanting to heal your gut and balancing your hormones and you are under eating, or even might think, am I under eating? If that's like a question that's really like coming up in the back of your mind, it's probably present. I will tell you, as a chronic under eater for most of my life, it's work to start to take in optimal amount of calories. But this is absolutely something that, you want to be making the choice to do, because if we continue to undereat, we're going to continue to struggle no matter how many supplements or greens powders or functional testing or elaborate routines that we bring into our lives. It is the most foundational level of healing. So our greatest hope is that awareness around the impact of undereating starts really trending in a major way in this kind of 2024. I've definitely seen it more. So we're moving in the right direction, but I think we got to make it louder. And we know that increasing caloric intake is not as easy as it sounds, especially when just as women, we've been inundated with this like eat less, exercise more, just mentality. And that idea of taking up less space physically, energetically, all of that kind of comes into question. So it certainly can be an emotional direction to move into, to start to kind of eat more calories, eat more food in general. And this is where, we want to recognize that it's not only a relationship to food, but it's a relationship to our body. And so just allowing yourself to put that onto the table, and we certainly do with clients so much. It's typically a bigger conversation than just like, hey, we're going to eat more at breakfast, lunch, and dinner and add in a snack or two. And like ipso facto, here we go. So we want to recognize that that's certainly, bring that attention to it. But we like to think about this as really making the intention for yourself, the decision to say, from here on forward, I am going to deeply nourish my body by taking in the optimal caloric intake that my body deserves to optimally function every single day. I remember, Jilly, when I made this decision, I think this is now like 4 years ago, somewhere around there, to stop kind of under eating, because I knew I was doing it, but I was like chronically constipated and I like really had low energy levels and just was like, but I'm not hungry and this feels so uncomfortable. And I remember having a conversation with Jilly. I think I've said this before, but she was we were just having a big conversation of under eating and how that was something that I really needed to like step up and make the decision around. And she was telling me that, yeah, even on days like if I, recognize, I reflect back on my day and I've recognized that I haven't taken in enough protein or just enough calories, like I'll do that right before I go to bed. Like I will eat another snack. Sometimes it's even a full meal if I need to, if just to hit that level so that my body is fed. I'm going to set myself up for better sleep. I'm going to have this whole experience. And I remember hearing that being like, you would even eat right before you go to sleep? Because I was in a big like fasting, because I felt better fasted, because I was chronically constipated, all of these things. But really, I was just creating this vicious cycle for my body that was keeping me stuck in that subclinical hypothyroid, low energy constipation dynamic. And I feel like it was literally after that conversation and like the shock and awe that I was like, oh my gosh, she's having like a big meal sometimes right before she goes to sleep, like revolutionary. But I was like, that's what I have to do. Like I have to make the decision so intensely to deeply nourish my body because I deserve it and I want healing so badly and my body deserves it, that like that was very much the thing that like sunk in, that I was like, okay, I'm open and willing to like eat a snack before bed or have a whole meal before bed, like if I haven't done a diligent job that day in like deeply nourishing. So it's just such a massive part of our health, and that sticks out to me so much.
I remember that conversation so vividly, and many people here know, or if you've say followed me on Instagram for a long time, I have been talking about under eating for what feels like a decade. And I do think we are, especially in relation to women's health and female physiology. And I agree with Abby. I think we are making progress. I think people are starting to get curious, to think about nutrition a little bit differently, but I think we have a long way to go. And, let's make 2024 the year that you really become best friends with your body and you commit to working in alignment with your body, to showing up for yourself, to focusing on, nourishment. We've said this before, but results with your health, results with digestive symptoms, hormones are never going to come from deprivation, restriction, or bullying your body. And we live in a world that makes it really challenging to work in flow with our bodies, because we're told that, we need to look at, externally, we need to do this quick fix or that quick fix. And, ultimately, I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is to, really work on everything that Abby just mentioned in terms of showing up for yourself, making a commitment to intentionally and adequately fueling your body every day.
And I remember that is very much, I think, a year from that day, I reflected with Jillian that I was like, oh my God, my health has done a 180 in the most positive sense. And I was reflecting back of what did I do over this past year? I'm in such a different place, this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, oh my God, the one major thing, and of the many million things that we always explore on ourselves just as practitioners, was that choice to intentionally, deeply nourish my body. And I always said this to when I was teaching, and I guess at this point I wasn't totally practicing what I was preaching when I was teaching this, but like you said, treat your body like a best friend. To the students, I'd say, if your best friend turned to you and was like, man, I'd really love a snack. I'm a little hungry. You'd be digging through your backpack being I think I have an old Kind bar in here somewhere. There's got to be a morsel of food, or I've got enough change for the vending machines. You would find your best friend a snack. You'd go to the ends of the earth to find your best friend a snack. And it's can we do that for ourselves? That it's even if you're oh, am I hungry? Am I not? Oh, okay, it's been 4 hours. Even if I'm not hungry, I'm going to fuel this body, because I know that based on that period of time, maybe my hunger hormones need a little bit more time to get into the groove of what they, optimally will be, but maybe they're not there yet. I'm going to help to teach them. I'm going to help to educate them that this is, our pattern of which we eat. So eating by the clock, when we're kind of moving ourselves out of that kind of under eating dynamic, is a really helpful strategy. That, again, this is kind of where in that intuitive eating world, you might be guided to say no, just listen to your body. And that's where a little bit we get to educate our body just as much as our body gets to educate us. So it's this two-way, beautiful kind of communication of how we show up for our body and our body shows up for us, because your body has your back.
Your body has your back. Oh my gosh, I love it. And I feel like I could sit here and continue to talk about this point for the next hour. However, we have one last barrier that we want to make sure that we chat about. It's an important one. If you are currently thinking about, making diet lifestyle changes, you're, in the trenches of a healing journey, or even you're just looking to make some tweaks to optimize your health. So our third barrier here is an all or nothing mindset, or black and white thinking, as another way to put it. All or nothing thinking when it comes to health and nutrition is truly one of the fastest ways to set yourself up for failure and a lot of frustration on your healing journey. Ultimately, an all or nothing mindset is rooted in perfectionism. Would you agree, Abby? That's kind of what really, comes to surface for me in terms of thinking about that, all or nothing, black and white, approach with food and nutrition and health.
Oh, absolutely. And I think so much of that, perfectionism has an undertone of stress to it.
100%. And, in terms of perfectionism, so many of us just get paralyzed or derailed by the fear of not being perfect. If we can't do something 100% perfectly, we don't allow ourselves to do it at all, or we just throw in the towel and say, F it. But the reality is that, we are all different. We are all unique. We have different needs. Human bodies are incredibly, incredibly complicated, and we are not robots. We were not designed to be perfect, and we were not meant to follow these strict, rigid plans perfectly. This is always relevant in the online health space, and in particularly, it's very relevant this time of year when people might be feeling a little off post-holidays, and, good old diet culture swoops in and tells us that we need to do a 21-day fix, a Whole 30, a sugar detox or some other random arbitrary elimination diet. And, if we're feeling a little bit off and we're getting all of this marketing about, feel better fast in 21 days, we totally get and empathize with why these things sound appealing. Oh, it's all laid out for me. That's perfect. That sounds so easy. But ultimately, these things in a long-term sense, they inevitably set us up for failure. We are chasing essentially just this impossible standard, and we're setting ourselves up for failure. Perfection with your diet, your nutrition, your lifestyle, it just doesn't exist. But the good news is you do not have to be perfect to see results with your health. And we often argue that the pursuit of perfection is something that will likely keep you stuck, and it will really prevent you from seeing true progress on your health and healing journey. So this is where we really want to think about prioritizing the inner work, the mindset work, while we're working to implement new strategies and to create new health promoting habits, especially if you have some of those perfectionist tendencies like, many of us do. We need to normalize the fact that there is always trial and error involved when you're making changes to support your health. We don't, set out to, create a new habit or implement a new strategy tomorrow and have everything just, go perfectly and for that to, integrate seamlessly into our lives. It just doesn't work that way. So when things don't go as planned, we really encourage clients to almost see this as a win, because we are learning what doesn't work, and that's going to help lead us to what does actually work. So when road bumps happen, this really just gives us the ability to, be more observational and to work towards creating the path of least resistance and to work towards more consistency with approaches that actually feel realistic and fit within the context, of our lives. So overall, really biggest piece of advice here, do not let perfectionism be the enemy of progress. Something inevitably will come up as you are making changes to your nutrition and lifestyle. It might throw you for a loop. You will have setbacks, you will have challenging days, challenging weeks, and just situations where things don't go as planned. And we just want you to know that this is a very, very normal part of this process. We don't need to beat ourselves up about this. We just want to get curious, be observational, and look for opportunities to better support and show up for ourselves moving forward. So what we want you to really do as you're thinking about making shifts with your nutrition and lifestyle in the new year is to move out of this idea that you have to be perfect. Focus on showing up for yourself, doing your best, and really, really getting comfortable with taking imperfect action on your health and healing journey.
I think that's so perfectly said. I mean, we see it all the time in clients that there is massive healing that can happen within a very comfortable lifestyle where someone is, eating the whole foods and doing the practices like 80% of the time. And then 20% of the time is just filled with joy. And, you fill in whatever that joy is. Is that joy food related? Is that joy activity related? Is it, glasses of wine? Is it, whatever that is? And we see incredible healing with that balance. So the idea that I must be 100% all the time in order for my body to heal. And if I take one step, out of my 100% perfection, it's going to throw me for a loop. Like you might, when you first get into it, notice a little bit uptick in symptoms. If you, dabble in the joy part a little bit more, but just an uptick in symptoms does not mean that you are now like on the road to demise in terms of your gut and your hormones. It's more just a little bit of that like white flag from the body of being like, oh, right now we like didn't love that. Like maybe let's tomorrow or the next meal kind of go back to, the foods that settle with us the best. And more of just that like helpful communication with the body. But I mean, we have very much in practice, we see clients able to like plug more fully into their lives at the same time that they have massive healing.
1000%. And to give you one last real life example here from Abby and I, who were together this weekend in Charleston, we, I forget what night it was, Thursday or Friday night, we went out to a fun dinner. And Abby and I are grandmas and like to eat an early dinner, and both of our bodies are pretty used to that pattern. And we ended up going out for dinner a little bit later than we had expected, and then there was a wait, and then we had a really nice leisurely dinner where we were, catching up, eating great food. We had a couple drinks, and just much later than we are typically eating day to day, and then there was some alcohol in the mix as well. The next morning, both of us were kind of feeling a little fuzzy, not feeling our most optimal, in terms of, energy and just brain function. So we went to the beach, we went on a big walk, we got fresh air, which felt really good. We came home, and actually I will mention too, first thing we did was fluid and minerals. Mm-hmm. We had a snack, then we went on a big walk, came home, had a great breakfast, and felt so much better, and we moved on with our day and had a wonderful day. So to give you an example here, sometimes if we wake up and say, something that we engaged in the night before didn't make us feel good, there can be the tendency to say, screw it, I already don't feel good. Like this weekend's a wash, or this day's a wash, and I'm not going to bring thought and intention to how I fuel my body and the habits I'm engaging in. So I point this out just to highlight the fact that, there are so many opportunities every day to show up for yourself. It doesn't mean we're going to do things 100% perfectly. And, if a situation doesn't go as planned, or maybe it did go as planned, but, you didn't feel your best afterwards, that's okay. Let's look at the next opportunity to show up for ourselves.
That's like a perfect example. And mind you, we spent the entire weekend together. We didn't take a solitary photo together, which I realized when I was flying home. I was like, I don't have any photos of Jillian and
I almost texted you that yesterday, and I was like, how is this possible? I have photos of food. I have photos of, drinks, Mowgli, weird supplements, all the things, and none of us. That just means you have to come back and visit again.
Exactly. But we use the exact same tools that we educate about. Did we feel perfect on the other side? No, it's also recognizing that like it was leading up to like, I was just going to start my period in the next couple of days. So I was like more sensitive. We were just talking about this, like more sensitive to alcohol. So I felt a little rougher than, maybe if I had been having this like right after my period or in those like first 2 weeks or things too. So it's also like just reflecting on like the context also of like, oh, like, why am I feeling like a little junkier or like fuzzier than usual? And it's like, oh, okay. All right. All that makes sense. Okay. Then that means, it's like, let's do a gentle like walk like we did. Let's kind of do, these practices that are going to help, help us to kind of get back, and then maybe like plan to go to bed early the next night, which I did not do. You did. I didn't. So
I was asleep at like 9:15. Yeah.
I was like on the town for the weekend, which definitely made it so my Sunday felt a little fuzzy. But
I love what you emphasize though about gentle practices, right? So what we didn't do is wake up and say, oh, I feel a little bit off. Let's go to a Barry's boot camp class or an Orange Theory class and, layer it on and, punish ourselves for last night. No, and this is the perfect example of, again, treating your body like a best friend, with kindness, being gentle, giving yourself some grace and flexibility. Amazing. Well, we hope that this was helpful. Three big barriers we see come up with clients. If any of this resonates for you, we'd love to hear from you. Make sure to shoot us a message on Instagram. Let us know what resonated, what you're working on. We're always here to support you and as a resource.